The laughter didn't stop right away. It rippled first, soft, polite, uncertain. Then it grew louder, bolder, until it filled the dining room and pressed against my ears like static. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, spine straight, cheeks burning, while my uncle wiped tears from his eyes and my cousin leaned back in her chair like she'd just heard the best joke of the year. "A platform," my aunt said, shaking her head. "For that." My mother didn't laugh. She didn't defend me either. She just stared down at the gravy boat like it might save her from choosing sides. I could still smell the turkey, dry, overcooked, exactly how it always was. The same house. The same table. The same traditions that never quite left room for people like me. "So let me get this straight," my cousin said, grinning. "You quit a stable job to build an app?" "It's not just an app," I said quietly. That made it worse. My uncle chuckled. "Honey, everything's an app now." More laughter. Someone tapped their wine glass with a fork, like punctuation. I nodded slowly, absorbing the moment. The humiliation. The way my idea had turned into entertainment before I'd even finished explaining it. They didn't ask how long I'd been working on it. They didn't ask who my users were. They didn't ask why I looked so tired. They only saw what they wanted to see. A risk. A delusion. A story they could tell later. I looked down at my plate, untouched. They didn't know what I had already done. Not yet. I'd almost skipped Thanksgiving that year. I told myself it was because of deadlines, investor calls, the endless exhaustion that came from carrying something fragile and unfinished. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to sit at that table again. Every year, it was the same questions wrapped in concern and sharpened with judgment. "Are you seeing anyone? Is that job really going somewhere? Don't you think it's time to be realistic?" This year, I'd walked in without a job title that made sense to them. Founder sounded pretentious. CEO sounded like a lie. So I'd said the truth. "I'm building something." And they'd smiled the way people do when they think you're going to fail softly. "Remember when she wanted to write a book?" my cousin said, laughing again. "This feels like that." I felt my jaw tighten. "That was different," my mother said weakly. "How?" my aunt asked. No one looked at me. I was invisible now. Just a reference point in a story about wasted potential. I swallowed and lifted my gaze. "I have users," I said. My uncle raised an eyebrow. "How many?" I hesitated for half a second. "Enough to matter. Not enough to explain quickly. Too many to dismiss, but only if you understood scale." "Thousands," I said. The laughter paused. Then resumed, louder. "Oh, sweetheart," my aunt said. "Everyone has thousands of something online." My cousin smirked. "How much money has this platform made?" I held his gaze. "None yet," I said. There it was. The verdict. My uncle leaned back. "Then it's a hobby." Something sharp settled in my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Resolve. I nodded. "Maybe," I said. Dinner moved on without me. They talked about promotions, mortgages, engagement rings. Things with neat timelines and visible milestones. I ate a few bites out of obligation. Inside, my mind drifted elsewhere. To the late nights. To the pitch deck I'd rewritten 12 times. To the email I'd sent that morning, the one I hadn't mentioned to anyone. I checked my phone under the table. No reply yet. That was fine. I'd learned patience the hard way. As dessert was served, my cousin leaned over. "No offense," he said, lowering his voice, "but you might want a backup plan." I smiled politely. "I already have one," I said. He laughed. "What is it?" I met his eyes. "Winning," I said. He blinked, confused. Then laughed again, louder than before. I smiled too. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't arguing. It's letting them believe you're small. I left early, claimed exhaustion, hugged everyone, promised to call. In my car, parked on the quiet street I'd grown up on, I finally exhaled. My phone buzzed. Once. Then again. I looked down. An email. From a domain I recognized instantly. My hands went cold. I opened it. And as I read the first line, the laughter from the dining room echoed in my head. Already fading, already irrelevant. Because something had shifted. And soon, very soon, they were going to see my idea somewhere they could never laugh it off. What I didn't realize then was how public that moment would become. And how quickly the roles around that table would reverse. The truth was, Thanksgiving wasn't where this started. It just happened to be where they noticed. The real beginning was 2 years earlier, in a borrowed office with flickering lights and chairs that didn't match. I remember the hum of the heater louder than the traffic outside, the way my laptop fan screamed every time I opened one more tab. I'd been the last one left at my old job that night. Everyone else had gone home to partners, dinners, predictable mornings. I stayed behind, staring at a spreadsheet that told me everything was fine. Salary, benefits, security, while my chest felt unbearably tight. It wasn't fear. It was suffocation. I closed the document and opened a blank page instead. No formatting. No pitch language. Just the problem I couldn't stop thinking about. The inefficiency no one wanted to talk about. The people being quietly excluded because the system wasn't built for them. The gap everyone pretended didn't exist because fixing it wasn't scalable. That was the night I wrote the first version. Not because I thought it would become a company, but because I couldn't unsee the problem anymore. When I quit, I didn't tell my family right away. I told my manager, then my landlord, then my bank. Each conversation took something out of me. My family came last. "You're brave," my mother had said over the phone, which meant I'm scared but I won't stop you. My uncle's response was easier. "Don't burn bridges," he warned. I didn't tell him I wasn't planning to cross back. The early months were invisible. No headlines. No announcements. Just quiet work and smaller rooms. I learned to code enough to be dangerous. Learned to ask better questions. Learned how quickly people stop listening when you don't look like what they expect a founder to look like. I pitched men who leaned back before I'd finished my second sentence. Who else is on the team? Is there a technical co-founder? Have you considered licensing this instead? Always instead. I learned to hear no before it was said. And I learned not to flinch. The first users didn't come from ads. They came from conversations. From late-night messages. From community forums. From people who felt seen by the problem because they lived inside it. They didn't ask if it was profitable. They asked if it would exist tomorrow. I answered honestly. "I don't know," I said. "But I'm here." That was enough. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, the platform was alive. Not polished. Not perfect. But alive. It breathed in data and exhaled possibility. The metrics told a story I didn't share at dinner. Retention that made advisors pause. Engagement that didn't fit the usual patterns. Growth that didn't spike, but stacked. Slow. Solid. Unignorable. The email I'd received in my car that night was the result of months of silence followed by one yes. "We've been watching." I didn't reply immediately. I'd learned that urgency could wait. Instead, I drove home and sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the couch, phone resting on my knee. I read the email again. And again. A meeting request. A serious one. The kind people pretended not to understand at family dinners. The next weeks blurred together. Calls that ran long. Decks that sharpened. Questions that got harder. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't matter. I started sleeping with a notebook by my bed. Some nights, I woke up convinced I was about to lose everything. Other nights, I woke up certain I was already winning. Both feelings felt the same in the dark. I didn't tell my family about the meetings. I didn't correct the jokes. At Christmas, my cousin asked if I was still doing the startup thing. I smiled and said yes. That's cute, he said. I smiled wider. The offer didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces. Interest. Due diligence. Terms that shifted power. I negotiated harder than anyone expected. I'd learned where to hold, where to bend, where to walk. The day the deal closed, I was alone. No champagne. No applause. Just me, my laptop, and a document that changed my life quietly. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen and thought about the table. The laughter. The gravy boat. I wondered if they'd still remember it when they saw what was coming. What I didn't realize then was that the moment they'd laughed about was about to become a headline. And it wouldn't ask for their approval. The invitation didn't come from me. That was important. It came wrapped in corporate language and forwarded emails, not apology or explanation. The kind of message that sounded harmless until you read it twice. We're hosting a small gathering to celebrate a milestone. +1's welcome. No mention of what the milestone was. No hint of how big it might be. Just a date. A location. A logo at the bottom of the email that made my stomach flip the first time I saw it. My mother forwarded it to me with a single line. Is this your thing? I stared at the screen, then typed back. Yes. She replied almost immediately. Should we come? I waited before answering. If you want. They wanted. Of course they did. The address alone was enough. Downtown. Glass. Height. Valet parking. By the time the evening arrived, my phone was buzzing with questions that sounded casual but weren't. What should we wear? Is this formal? Will there be press? I answered carefully. Business casual. No, I don't think so. All technically true. I arrived early. I always did. The lobby smelled like polished stone and ambition. My heels echoed as I crossed the floor, badge clipped neatly to my jacket. People nodded at me, some familiar, some newly important. I took the elevator up alone. In the mirrored walls, I barely recognized myself. Not because I'd changed. Because I'd stopped shrinking. They arrived together. My uncle first, suit pressed a little too carefully. My aunt beside him, eyes wide, taking everything in. My cousin trailing behind, phone already out, scanning for something worth posting. They froze when they saw me. Oh, my mother said softly. You're hosting. I smiled. I work here. That was all. The room filled slowly. Low music. Soft laughter. The hum of deals being referenced without being discussed. I introduced my family to people they didn't know how to place. This is my mother. My uncle. My cousin. No titles. No explanations. I watched my cousin's expression change as each handshake lingered just a second longer than polite. Nice to meet you, one man said. I've heard a lot. About me. Not the idea. Me. Drinks were served. My uncle leaned in. So, he said. What exactly is this milestone? I tilted my head. You'll see. He chuckled nervously. You're being mysterious. I smiled. When the room was full, the music softened. A man stepped onto the small stage. Well-dressed. Confident. Someone my family immediately recognized as important. He thanked everyone for coming. Talked about growth. Vision. Market shifts. Then he said my name. I felt every eye turn toward me, including theirs. This wouldn't exist without her, he said. Not as an idea, but as a company. The room applauded. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My cousin stared. The man continued. And tomorrow morning, he added, you'll see her work in a place most startups never reach. The screen behind him lit up. A skyline. A familiar curve of digital signage. The Nasdaq building. My family didn't breathe. The image shifted. My company's name filled the banner. Bright. Unmissable. Public. The room erupted. Applause. Cheers. Phones lifted. I stood still. I didn't smile. I looked at my family. My uncle's face had gone pale. My aunt's eyes glistened. My cousin's mouth hung open. My mother just stared at me, something breaking open behind her eyes. They'd laughed at this. At me. And now it was larger than all of us. My cousin found his voice first. "Wait," he said. "You're going public." I shook my head. "No," I said. "We already did." Silence. He swallowed. "When?" he asked. I checked my watch. 30 minutes ago. The rest of the night blurred. Congratulations. Photos. Questions. My family stayed close to me, like proximity could rewrite history. My uncle apologized. My aunt cried. My cousin asked if I was hiring. I answered none of it. Because revenge doesn't need commentary. It just needs contrast. As they left, my mother hugged me tightly. "I should have listened," she whispered. I held her. "You did," I said. "Eventually." She nodded. Later, alone again, I stood by the window overlooking the city. The Nasdaq banner glowed in the distance, my company's name cycling through like it belonged there. Because it did. They didn't know what I had already done. They only knew now. And somehow, that made all the difference. Success doesn't arrive with clarity. It arrives with noise. The morning after the banner went live, my phone didn't stop vibrating. Messages stacked on top of each other until individual names stopped meaning anything. Congratulations blurred into requests. Pride tangled with entitlement. I didn't respond right away. I watched the city wake up instead. From my window, the Nasdaq building still glowed faintly in the early light, like proof the night hadn't been a dream. My company's name wasn't there anymore, the banner rotated, but something had shifted permanently. You don't unsee yourself that big. My family was quieter. That was new. The group chat, once filled with articles about safe careers and unsolicited advice, went silent. When it finally broke, it wasn't with celebration. It was with confusion. "So, what happens now?" my aunt asked. I typed, erased, typed again. "Now we work." No emojis. No explanation. The calls started later. My uncle first. "I just wanted to say," he began, voice careful. "We didn't realize how serious it was." I held the phone away from my ear for a second, then brought it back. "I know," I said. "That laughter," he continued. "It wasn't meant to." "It was," I said gently. "And that's okay." He paused. "I'm proud of you," he said. I believed him. That didn't mean it changed anything. My cousin's call came that evening. His tone was different now. Lighter, rehearsed. "So," he said, "crazy week, huh?" "Busy," I replied. "I showed your thing to some people," he continued. "They were impressed." I waited. "You know," he added, "if you ever need help scaling." "No," I said. Silence. "I didn't mean." "I know," I said again. "But no." He laughed awkwardly. "Right. Of course." We hung up shortly after. For the first time in our lives, there was nothing left to explain. My mother came to see me a week later. She stood in my kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug, looking around like she was searching for the version of me she thought she knew. "I tell people about you now," she said softly. I smiled. "What do you say?" "That my daughter built something big," she said. "That I always believed in her." I met her eyes. She flinched. "I didn't always," she corrected. "No," I agreed. "You didn't." She nodded, accepting it. "But I do now," she said. That was enough. Success changes the questions people ask. Not why anymore, but how can I be part of it? Former acquaintances resurfaced with friendly messages and thinly veiled expectations. Distant relatives discovered pride. Old co-workers remembered my name. I learned a new skill then. Saying no without guilt. One afternoon, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hey, it's your cousin. New phone." I didn't reply. Another message followed. "I just wanted to apologize properly." I stared at the screen. Then I typed. "You already did. At Thanksgiving." 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. That was the end of it. At the office, nothing changed. That mattered more than the banner. The team showed up. The product evolved. The problems stayed difficult. I wasn't celebrated there. I was needed. That felt better. Weeks later, the banner returned. This time, I stood across the street and watched it cycle. Tourists pointed. Someone took a photo. No one knew who I was. And I liked it that way. Because the revenge wasn't being recognized. It was being unshakable. At the next Thanksgiving, I brought a pie. I sat at the same table. The laughter was different now. Careful, respectful. No one asked about backup plans. No one called it an app. When my cousin mentioned a business idea of his own, everyone listened politely. I smiled into my wine glass. Not because I was petty, but because I understood something now. Success doesn't demand belief. It renders doubt irrelevant. What they didn't know that first Thanksgiving was that they were watching the last moment they'd ever be ahead of me. And they'd never laugh like that again. The strange thing about winning is how quickly the noise fades. Not the outside noise, the headlines, the congratulations, the invitations that arrive wrapped in false familiarity, but the internal kind. The voice that used to ask if I was wrong. If they were right. If I was being reckless instead of brave. That voice went quiet after the banner. Not silent. Just finished. A year passed. Then another. My company grew in ways no one at that Thanksgiving table would have predicted. Not explosively. Not chaotically. But deliberately. We hired carefully. We scaled slowly. We said no more than we said yes. I learned to measure success differently. Not by valuation. Not by press. But by how rarely I had to explain myself anymore. My family adjusted. That's the word I use because forgiveness implies something they never quite asked for. They stopped teasing. Stopped offering advice they hadn't earned. Stopped treating my ambition like a phase. At gatherings, my uncle introduced me with pride that felt genuine, but a little rehearsed. "This is my niece," he'd say. "She started a company." Not the company. Not the Nasdaq. Just enough to signal respect without fully confronting the past. I let him have that. My cousin changed too. Not dramatically. Just enough to be noticeable. He became quieter when I spoke. More attentive when I shared opinions. Careful not to interrupt. Once, after dinner, he pulled me aside. "I didn't get it back then," he said. "But I do now." I studied his face. "No," I said gently. "You don't." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You understand the result," I said. "Not the cost." He nodded slowly. That was as close as we ever came to reconciliation. And it was enough. My mother surprised me most. She stopped bragging. Instead, she listened. One afternoon, sitting across from me at a cafe, she said, "I wish I'd protected you more when you were younger." I looked at her. "You taught me how to stand alone," I said. That mattered. She smiled, eyes wet. We didn't rewrite history. We acknowledged it. Every November, when Thanksgiving rolled around, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Not dread. Memory. The sound of laughter. The heat in my face. The way the table had felt tilted against me. I never forgot it. I didn't want to. Because forgetting would have meant pretending it didn't shape me. And it did. One year after dinner, my aunt asked me something quietly while the others cleared plates. Did it hurt? She asked. That night. I considered lying. Then I shook my head. No, I said. What hurt was realizing how easy it was for you to doubt me. She nodded, ashamed. I won't do that again, she said. I know, I replied. Because she couldn't afford to. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that first pitch document. The one written in a borrowed office with flickering lights and a heater that barely worked. I think about how fragile it was. How easy it would have been to quit. How close I came, more than once. And I think about that moment at the table. The laughter. The certainty. The way they thought the story had already been decided. They didn't know what I had already done. But more importantly, they didn't know what I was capable of enduring. Success didn't make me louder. It made me precise. It taught me that validation feels best when it arrives late, after you've stopped needing it. That revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like a banner you don't point out. A room that falls quiet without you asking it to. A table that never laughs at you again. Now, when people ask me for advice, I tell them this. Let them doubt you. Let them laugh. Let them misunderstand the size of what you're building. Because one day, they'll see it finished. And by then, you won't be building it for them anymore. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.